What are some other mistakes that people make when they're looking for the right job or looking for their next opportunity?
One, that a lot of people don't have a target for what it is that they're even looking for, and they don't have a plan. When you're looking for new work, you need to have a career target and make that really focused. How I see that show up to people is they will plaster the marketplace with hundreds and hundreds of resumes. These are all generic resumes. They have not been customized to the company or the job. And guess how many interviews these people are getting, Kendall? Big nothing, no interviews. I remember speaking to an individual. He sent out 300 resumes in 1 week. And I said, how many interview invites have you received? Well, of course, the answer was none because there was no clarified target and there was no customization. They launch into just sending the resume, clicking easy apply on LinkedIn, which tends to not get you too far. Not in this marketplace, too, where over 1,000 people will compete for the same job.
Corporate life is a game, but no one hands you the rule book. Here on Secrets of the Career Game, we break down the unspoken norms and behind-the-scenes dynamics shaping your career today. I'm Kendall Berg, that career coach, and I guide professionals to grow, advance, and lead with clarity. Each week, we explore the tools, habits, and conversations that build confidence, presence, and long-term momentum. You guys are in for a wild ride today, I can already tell you. Our guest is absolutely fantastic. We have Michelle Schaefer with us, and she is the bestseller author, Cultivating Career Growth and Navigating Transitions with Purpose. And she and I are about to have a fabulous conversation about career clarity, career transitions, career progression. But Michelle, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you so much, Kendall. Really excited for our conversation today.
So why don't you get listeners up to speed a little bit on your background? Take them through kind of your professional career and that what led you into becoming a career coach.
Absolutely. So it's interesting. I've experienced career transition myself over the course of my career. I've been restructured twice. I've reinvented myself twice. I was in financial services for 18 years. Lost my job the first time because of a merger and acquisition and decided I didn't want to be in financial services anymore. I really wanted to take my love of volunteering and parlay it into a career. So I transitioned into not-for-profit, quite different from financial services. I needed to really, repackage my skills, promote myself in a different way, took my background of customer service, human resources, learning and development, and then worked for a large national cancer organization for 7 years, working with volunteers and training them, actually. So it was a really neat application of my learning and development background. But as a not-for-profit, when the funding isn't there, people and oftentimes programs need to go away. And I was restructured again for the second time. And it was interesting. It was at that juncture, Kendall, that I recognized that I wanted to get into coaching. And the reason for that is a year before I lost my job, a really good friend of mine who's a coach said, I never understood why you didn't do this as a career, like get into coaching. And at the time, I loved my job. I was working for volunteers. I was, working for this organization that supported people living with cancer and their families. But then when I lost my job a second time, it was kind of like the universe that was saying, here's a door that's open. You should really go and pursue this. And the reality was I was always coaching people in one way or another over the courses of my last roles. So I used that opportunity to start networking with individuals, networking with coaches, coaches of, different specialties like money coaches, health and fitness coaches, marriage coaches, career coaches, leadership coaches, and recognize that I really wanted to get into coaching and I really wanted to apply it into the career space. So I, got 2 levels of my coaching certification, set up a business, and the rest is history. It's just amazing when one door closes that, it's a cliche, but a door does open in its place.
There's so many synergies between kind of your journey and mine. My background's not in learning development, but it is in corporate financial services. Yes. And same thing. My husband's like, why aren't you coaching? I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not a job. Excuse you. And I was kind of, I always joke I had become like everybody would send their low performers to me like, hey, you can help them. You can make them better. And so I just became this coach inside my companies and then eventually took it on my own. So I love hearing your journey because I think there's so much,
synergy happening between the two.
Absolutely.
So your specialty is a little different than mine. Yours is really on the career pivot and finding the best role for themselves, right? For the individual.
Yeah.
So what kind of questions should somebody ask themselves if they are, maybe they're a victim of one of the many recent layoffs, maybe they are just hitting a point in their career where they're like, this is not it. What do they ask themselves as they go into that career pivot?
Yeah, that is such a great question. And I mean, the operative word certainly is that like question, because we oftentimes when we either lose a job or we want to run away from a situation that we have, we want to find something new. Oftentimes we do that. We just run, we just move very quickly. We might, just kind of, cascade our resumes across the marketplace to hundreds and hundreds of organizations, which is what you should not do. What you should do instead is, I call it in my book, hitting the pause button, which is take a step off the world. Just, take a few moments, reflect on what's important to you. And I'd like to think that there are 5 key questions that every person should ask themselves before they even think about what their next move is going to be. The first one is, if you're really honest with yourself, take stock of the work that really gives you energy, like the work that fires you up. And this could be something that you did as your first job. It doesn't even have to be the job that you're leaving now. Think about very specific times about, when you were fired up about your work, what were you doing and why did that particular activity or responsibility fire you up? So that's question number 1. Question number 2 is the flip of question number 1, which is, again, if you're really honest with yourself, what is the kind of work that drains you? Now, this could be work that you're really skilled at doing. Maybe you're even known for it. People come to you for this particular thing, but it feels like an obligation. Maybe you even catch yourself procrastinating because it is not something that lights you up. It's quite the opposite. So then the third question is taking stock of what are my transferable skills? And transferable skills, of course, are those skills that are sought after by any industry, any other kind of role. Things like leading large projects or building relationships, client service, writing reports, any of those things are transferable skills. So actually taking stock of what those things are would be question number 3. Question number 4 is everything to do with the organization, which is what is the profile of the right kind of organization where I can do my best work? And I like to think of this as being an organization that believes the same things that you believe in. So what's the mandate of that organization? What are the values? And when I say values, I do not mean what appears on a company's website. I mean, what are the demonstrated values? How do they show those values to employees and clients alike? What is the kind of leader that this organization employs? What are the team members? Like thinking of what's the best leader I've ever worked for, you want to be able to seek out organizations that employ those kind of leaders. So everything to do with the organization. Question number 4. Question number 5 has to do with what are my deal breakers? What are my non-negotiables? And these are the things, Kendall, that are so deeply important to you that you might walk away from an opportunity, maybe even a good opportunity, if these things were not there. And our non-negotiables, oftentimes we don't sit and think about what these are. But as we go through life, as we age and we go through different stages, our non-negotiables might change. For me, like right now, I'm 56. I've got 2 boys. They're 19 and 17. When I was in my 20s, I was happy traveling all across Canada. I'm in Ottawa, Canada. So, I would travel and live out of a suitcase for my work. Well, now with 2 boys, like that's not the kind of work that I'd be looking for. So taking stock of, what is the location that you want to be in? What are the hours that you want to work? Like, what are the things that, you really need to have as being flexible in your life? Take stock of those. And then you've got your 5 questions, which is going to help you intentionally seek out opportunities that line up to those responses to those key questions.
There's so much value in the 5 questions that you shared, Michelle, and I think it's interesting the question about company culture. And I love the way that you said the actual company culture, not,
Yes.
the placards in the hallway, not the HR manual they give you day one, if they even do that anymore. But really that, what are the values they show up? How are they seen by their employees? How are they seen by their customers? Because I do think that seems to be a big concern now is, I don't want to go work for a company that looks great on paper, but I get there and it's totally different. And it is so important, like you mentioned, to really take that step back and pause. I always equate it to jumping off a sinking ship into a lifeboat with a hole in it, right? You're like, oh, I've got to get off this ship. We just jump into the first boat we see and that ship's sinking too. And so taking that time to be like, okay, maybe we just swim. Maybe we need a floaty. Maybe we have other boats we can hop into. And so I think this is such important advice, especially if you've been laid off. Mentally, I feel like especially in that space, there's maybe some shame, maybe some frustration, maybe some, lack of self-confidence. And we think, oh, I'm just going to get back on the horse. I'm just going to get the next job. I'm going to recover quick. And I feel that that's so often such a mistake when it so
can
much
be. You use the analogy of the sinking ship. I mean, I also think of it as, like the grass, the cliche says the grass is greener on the other side. Well, what oftentimes happens when you run away from what you have and you just, fall into the first thing that crosses your path, you go over that fence and you might realize, oh, the grass is actually more burnt over here than it was when I was leaving. And so, when we're looking for a new opportunity, I like to think of, a more intentional, successful way of finding something new is, as opposed to running away from what you have, it's running to an opportunity of good fit. And Kendall, you mentioned how, it's so important to, really have a good understanding of what the profile of the organization is, the one that you want to go to next. And one of the things that is misunderstood, I think, about interviews is, candidates saying, oh, like, the company is going to be asking me questions, so I just need to answer those questions. Meanwhile, I say to my clients, I say, you're assessing and interviewing the company as much as they're assessing and interviewing you. So go to the interview with some really great questions. You mentioned about culture. What I see some people do is say, so describe the company culture, which is way too high level and doesn't really get you the information that you need. But when you ask a question like, describe how you demonstrate the company values to your employees, now you're getting at something far more specific. Or even a question like, what brought you to this organization? Like, what attracted you to work here and what's keeping you here? Those are like two different ways of assessing culture without asking the culture question, but it's a great way to know whether the organization will be a good fit. And that's so important, because if you just grab any job, you may realize that that's not a good fit. And Kendall, some of your listeners may have lost their job and they have to find something new fast because of financial obligations. And to all of those listeners, I'll say, so go ahead and take that job because you need to, but commit to yourself that you're going to keep looking for something that's a much better fit. That's just the key to career fulfillment ongoing, is making sure you're working for the right organization, doing the right kind of work that really fires you up.
Yes, Michelle. And I think that to that last point of like, yes, you can take that job. We understand, right? If you're listening to this, you're like, hi, I'm Mighty from the Career Coach. Say, take the perfect job. It's a lot harder to find. We get that. Sometimes you have to take a job, right? There have been times in my career where like I could not afford to be unemployed. I get it.
Exactly.
What I would say is, so often, I'm sure you see this as well, clients will tell me like, oh, well, I can't take this other job. I just started my job 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago.
Yes.
Girl, no, they would lay you off tomorrow regardless of your tenure.
Exactly.
You need to do what's right for you and for your career. Now, that may burn a bridge at that job you may never be able to go back to. But if it's not the right fit for you, then it doesn't matter anyways, right?
No,
and so
exactly.
being responsible, being respectful, those are important as you communicate, but do the best thing for you in your career.
You have to. I mean, I've had clients who have expressed that same degree of concern, Kendall, where they've accepted an offer and then, the job that they really wanted, all of a sudden that company made them an offer. They weren't ready to, maybe at the time that they were being interviewed, but then there were some changes and then an offer came forward. And I remember specifically one of my clients, she said, I want to break up with this company, but I don't think I can do it. And I said, not only can you do it, it's all about how you do it that's really going to leave an impression. And she was so worried about this because she thought, oh, this company, they'll never talk to me. They're going to be so mad. They just hired me. She was only in the job for 2 months. I mean, I can understand where her concern was. And so we sat down and we talked about how you can frame this breakup, right? Because she was breaking up with the organization to go with another one. But she did it in such a way that she framed it really grounded in what was important to her in her career at this time. She had done all that reflection. She asked herself those 5 questions that we talked about earlier, and she was able to frame for them to say, this other opportunity lines up for me in these specific ways. She said, I've loved working here. This is a wonderful opportunity, but I really feel called to go in and take this other one. She was so afraid that they were going to be mad. They were understanding. They totally got it. They said, you know what? I mean, of course we're sad to see you go, but go and do that thing that's really going to light you up. Like, they were happy that she was following her path. And, to anybody who's listening thinking, oh, I can't do this. I can't resign. I can't, go and take something else. Well, the answer is yes. And to your point, they might lay you off. I mean, companies make big business decisions all the time. We need to do what's right for us. We need to do what's right for our career. It's empowering to do that. And we're just going to put ourselves in a much happier path as well.
So we talked about a couple of mistakes that people make when they're looking for a job, right? Not pausing to take time to really assess what you want, asking too vague of questions in the interview rather than specifically what is it about the culture that you're looking for. We talked about, not taking the right job based on timing, even if it overlaps a little bit with taking the wrong job. But what are some other mistakes that people make when they're looking for the right job or looking for their next opportunity?
For sure. I mean, I would say there's 2 parts to this mistake. One, that a lot of people don't have a target for what it is that they're even looking for, and they don't have a plan. And I liken looking for work or exploring a new career path like going on vacation. Now, Kendall, it's not as much fun. We both know that. But the similarities are, if you're going on vacation, you need to have a destination. You need to know where you're going. Well, it's the same when you're looking for new work. You need to have a career target and make that really focused. And you need to have a plan. Similar to when you go on vacation, chances are you're not just going to show up and figure everything out. Although I'll be honest, when I was in my early 20s, I did lots of travel like that. I just showed up at a city, figured out the accommodations, figured out where I was going to go. I would not recommend that, of course, when you're looking for work. So, the first part of it, not having the destination, not having the career target, how I see that show up to people is they will plaster the marketplace with hundreds and hundreds of resumes. These are all generic resumes. They have not been customized to the company or the job. And guess how many interviews these people are getting, Kendall? Big nothing, no interviews. I remember speaking to an individual. He sent out 300 resumes in 1 week. And I said, how many interview invites have you received? Well, of course, the answer was none because there was no clarified target and there was no customization. So I'd say that's a big mistake that people make. They launch into just sending the resume, clicking easy apply on LinkedIn, which tends to not get you too far. Not in this marketplace, too, where over 1,000 people will compete for the same job. But the second part of that mistake is there's also no plan. And where I see a lot of people spend the bulk of their job seeking time is in looking online and just applying for jobs. Meanwhile, if we think of looking for new work as being, I don't know, like a pie or a cake, whatever dessert you might like, online looking and applying is only 20% of that pie or that cake, which means that 80% of the pie has to do with relationship building. So the other parts of the plan, yes, online does need to be part of your job search plan, but reach out to headhunters and recruiters, form relationships with them. There's lots of really great opportunities with them. And then the other part of that 80% is networking. Reach out to your circle. Start, talking to people. Go and have coffee chats. Kendall, when I was looking for work, I remember the first time I was restructured, I think I drank more coffee than I ever have. And ditto to when I started my business. I just started having coffees and lunches and breakfasts with all kinds of people, because that's how you build relationships. You get to talk to people, and you get to explore opportunities. So create that plan. Make sure that online is only a small part of your plan. Make a big part of your plan reaching out and networking. And I would say, like, mistake number 3 that I see people making as well, and this has to do with networking, is that not being willing to reach out. Oftentimes there's a lot of limiting beliefs that stand in our way. We assume that networking is this icky thing and a lot of people don't want to do it. Meanwhile, if we reframe what networking is, it's having conversations. And we have conversations every day, oftentimes with people that we don't know. And when we have conversations that have to do with our job search, that's networking. Networking is really just research through conversation. We are gathering information and we're learning through conversation. And so, those mistakes can really hold people back to finding something that they really like.
Michelle, you talked about it's just having a conversation. Networking is this reframe of chatting with people. And I'm sure you feel this keenly as I do, that so often people come to me and they're like, well, I don't want to waste their time. They're really busy. They don't want to chat with me. And they see this as almost like a sales exchange. And I had a mentee over the summer. I mentor some young girls in my state. And she was 16 and she said, what's the difference between using someone and networking? And I thought that was such a mature question, because I feel like, to your point of limiting beliefs, that's another limiting belief people have is, well, if I talk to them, then I'm using them for this job. So I'd love to hear your take on that. What is the difference between using somebody and networking with them?
Yeah, I mean, that is really such an interesting perspective. And I mean, I've heard that from, I would say, my clients who are really resistant to having these conversations, because they feel like they're taking. They feel like, well, I'm asking for that person's help. And so it's just about me taking, and that feels really uncomfortable to a lot of people. And I'll also extend with that. Like, I do a lot of work with newcomers to Canada, and newcomers from like a whole host of different countries around the world. There are some countries where what we're talking about here, Kendall, like reaching out and asking for help and talking to people to help your job search, that is frowned upon in a lot of countries. So that can be hard too. It does feel like you're kind of using the individual. And, what I say to people is, just as a way of reframing that, is networking is a part of our fabric, our career development fabric. Like, not only is it encouraged, but it's acceptable to reach out to other people. And, like the limiting belief that we're talking about here, which is, well, I can't reach out, like that other person is going to be busy and I'm just, asking for their time. Yes, people are busy. I mean, of course, right? I mean, that is our society. We're all busy in different ways. But the reframe of that and the truth about that is people want to help. Like, and how I'll flip it around with people. If I have a client who says that, like, oh, I'm using that person's busy, I don't want to bother them, I don't want to bug them. I say, okay, let's just turn this around for a moment and look at it from a different perspective. I said, imagine that you're still working and somebody, maybe it's a neighbor or a friend of a friend, reaches out to you over LinkedIn or over email and says, oh, like, you're an interior designer, for example. I want to be an interior designer. Like, would it be okay if I take you out for coffee? And I just asked you some questions about, how you chose this path. I said, what would you say to that person? And they say, well, I would go meet them for coffee. And then they say, oh, yeah. I said, so Would it be possible that that this might happen when you ask people? Well, yeah, of course it is. So the people are too busy. The reframe of that is people actually do want to help because you want to help other people too. They just want to know how you can help. The other part of this that I hear, and this is a big limiting belief as well, is I can't reach out to people who are too senior in an organization. Like they say, oh, I can't reach out to the CEO. I can't reach out to the executive director. I can't reach out to like a managing director because that person is really senior in the organization. And the reframe of that is, yes, that person has a title and they have, initials after their name, but that person is human. They probably had to do a lot of networking to get where they are. And oftentimes CEOs and executive directors and other senior individuals are happy to pay it forward. They're happy to pay it back, but you just need to ask. And so when we ask, we oftentimes can be really surprised. If you don't ask, you don't get. I mean, it's very true. You have to put yourself out. What's the worst thing that can happen? Somebody says no, you're no further behind, but you can be very far ahead if you say yes. The other limiting belief, and this is the third one, and this one's really big that I see with people, is they'll say, I have no network. I have nobody to reach out to. And, the reframe of that is our networks are way bigger than we think. So if you go to the gym, those people are part of your network. If you have neighbors, everybody's got neighbors, unless you live like, on 10 acres in the country and you don't have a neighbor beside you, but you can reach out to your neighbors, friends of friends, family members, people in your cultural or spiritual community, former colleagues, people that you took a class with or you volunteer with. Those are all part of your network. So, a friend of mine that I met in a networking group when I first started coaching, Kendall, had a saying, which was, look through your network, not at it. Meaning, if you want to get, like I think of myself, when I moved from financial services into not-for-profit, I didn't know many people in not-for-profit, but a lot of people in my financial services community knew people in not-for-profit. I needed to look through the people who I knew immediately to know that each of us knows hundreds of people. Kendall, you know hundreds of people, and those people know hundreds of people. So when you extend our network to include the people who know the people that we know, now any of those people can help you, and now your network is far bigger. So there's so much magic in asking people to have these conversations. You can learn so much. You can find out new opportunities. You can actually get a job this way.
I think a common thread in what you were sharing with those 3 limiting beliefs is it also assumes that the other person does not have agency. They're too busy. They won't want to meet with you. Great. Shouldn't they have that choice? Exactly. Or they're too senior, they don't want to meet with me. Great. Shouldn't they have that choice? Or I don't have anybody to reach out to. Like, don't you have agency to go meet people? And it assumes that there's this lack of agency on the behalf of the people we're networking with, that they are victims held against their will in these coffee chats, as opposed to them having the opportunity to accept or reject, or to say, hey, I don't have time to meet with you, but you should meet with my chief of staff, Jane. She'd love to connect with you, or whatever it is. So I think, I would encourage you, as part of your reframing to the listener, is if you're feeling these same hesitations that Michelle is talking about, right? They're too busy, they're too senior, I don't have anybody to reach out to. Put it instead of like, wouldn't you want somebody to ask you, instead of to find out 5 years later, oh, so-and-so wanted to meet with me, but they assumed I didn't want to, so they never invited me. This is like the dating question. If you never ask them out on a date, you're probably not going to go on a date with them. I'm just throwing it out there.
You have to ask. And I mean, the other part of that, when you use that word assume, that's our internal narrative. Like, we tell ourselves stories. We make up these stories that are founded on assumptions and judgments. So, my recommendation with that is ask yourself, what in this is fact? So until somebody actually says no, that's a fact. But if we're assuming that they're going to say no, we're assuming that they're too busy, you're right. To your point, we're not even giving them the opportunity, and we're saying no before they even have a chance to say no. And chances are, like, 95% of people want to help. Maybe you're not going to get that help on the day that you want it, But you will get that help because we will have asked. But if you don't ask, you're denying yourself that chance.
So I talk about networking all the time. I think it's so important whether you're looking to make a change or you're looking to move up. And
Absolutely.
that by building more connections with more people, you're building authentic relationships that, yes, may benefit you in terms of a role, but they may teach you. They may reconnect you to somebody else, to your point of looking through the network. So I love all of this. I think this is so important. Forbes published a study a few years ago that said about 80% of new hires were based on referral. And I reference that all the time because you know how they got referred? They networked, right? They asked. They probably didn't get the referral on accident. And so I think that, is so key. And so for these people who are listening, who are like, okay, I need to find something new. I need to make a pivot in my career. Maybe it's something different, right? You talked earlier about, when you want to do the same thing, all of your skills are fungible. When you want to stay in the same industry, all of your skills are applicable. But for somebody who's trying to make a pivot, what are some, tips or advice that you have for them in that kind of search as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd say there's two big things. The first is, to piggyback on our earlier conversation around like hitting that pause button and reflecting. Like, ask yourself, first of all, before you do anything, ask yourself those 5 questions that we talked about earlier about the energizing work, the kind of organization you want to be part of, your non-negotiables especially. Those are the keys to career fulfillment. And when you have an idea of what those things are, one of the things that I'm recommending to my clients even, and this is an easy thing for your listeners to do, is when you answer those 5 questions, feed in your responses along with an updated version of your resume, because that's a capture of your achievements, your skills, your experience, and all of that. Feed both of those things into ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever AI you use. And you can ask, like ChatGPT, what career options would you recommend for me based on my career preferences and based on the skills and experience that I have? And more than that, also ask Chat to populate for you what are some reflection questions you need to ask yourself as a way of streamlining all of those potential options, and what are some questions you can ask other people who are in those career paths as also a way of gathering information and streamlining all of your choices. That would be like step number 1. Like, that's something that's easy to do, and people are always amazed at what comes out, and they think, oh, I never even thought about, this particular option. Like for me, it was, coaching. I had somebody plant that seed, but let's say nobody planted that seed for me. You can use AI tools as a way of generating some options to see where might be a good place for you to pivot. The second part to that is then start reaching out to people, start having coffees, start figuring out who in your network. And again, the people like looking through the network, start having some conversations with people to learn more about these paths. Ask those reflection questions of them and more questions as well. Gather the information, remembering that networking is just, research through conversation. You're going to learn information that will help you either put a check mark beside some of these possible pivot options, or maybe you're going to put an X through them. Like, I'll use myself as an example with that. When I was looking to get into not-for-profit out of financial services, I'll be honest, Kendall, I had no idea of what to do. And that's one of the reasons I wrote my book, Cultivating Career Growth, is I wanted to help people figure out what that roadmap, that plan would be for taking those next steps. But a number of people in my circle, when they heard that I was thinking about not-for-profit, they said, you'd be a great fundraiser. Now, fundraising is sales, right? It uses those same skill sets, except you're selling a cause, you're connecting potential large donors to that cause. But the more I started networking with fundraisers as a way of exploring it, I realized fundraising was not for me. It's for a lot of other people. It was not a good fit for me. But if I had made that decision kind of in a vacuum, I might have walked into something that really would have been an uncomfortable fit. So do the reflection, start talking to people, narrow your options, and then from there, you can start developing your resume and your LinkedIn to make sure it's telling the right career story about yourself, and really starting to develop a plan to help you seek out those opportunities that you really would like to move into.
This has been so great, Michelle. And I love how tactical this is, right? It's so applicable and it's so clear how people can really start to make progress. So I love this. If people are listening to today's episode and they love it as much as I do, and they want to follow you, they want to get in contact with you, they want to get your book, where is the best place for them to go connect?
Absolutely. So my website, mschafercoaching.ca, is a source of information about me, information about my programs. You can get a free chapter of my book. So Kendall, I'm going to give that to all of your listeners. And another freebie that I'm going to give to everybody today is access to my reflective tool. So I call it my career focus framework. It captures those 5 questions that we talked about earlier and many more. You can access that for free as a way of just starting to think about all of the important considerations about looking for new work. And LinkedIn is another great place to find me. I post about, career exploration and job seeking topics, I would say 5 out of 7 days of the week. So there could be some other inspiration and some other tactical ideas for you. And a link to my book is also on my website. So it is available on Amazon. It's called Cultivating Career Growth, Navigating Transitions with Purpose. It won an International Impact Book Award this year. So I was really excited about that. And definitely it's part strategies and tips, but also part workbook. So you can start working through and developing your job search plan chapter by chapter.
That's so wonderful. So we'll connect all of those in the show notes so that if anybody is listening, wants to go check out Michelle, you guys can do so there. If you like today's episode, make sure you leave us 5 stars. If you have any questions for Michelle or myself, please put them below in the comments. Otherwise, Michelle, thank you so much for taking time and getting to chat with us. This was so great.
Thank you so much, Kendall.